Hi, I'm Maxim from Versa, and in this video I'll go to show you how to deploy VOS in Azure. First step will be to create a new VM. So I'll log into my portal.azure.com and click on Virtual Machines. And then click Create a new Azure Virtual Machine. And here I need to select a subscription. So I'll select Pay As You Go. And resource group, I will create a new resource group. We'll give it my name. So it's my resource group. Can it easily identify in future? And then virtual machine name. For example, I can type was Maxim demo. Once I give it a name, I can select a region where in which region I want to deploy my VM. So in my case, it will be West Europe. And availability zone, I select zone 1. Security type will be a standard. And image, if you click on see all images, and on marketplace you can search for a Versa image. So we have two images here. One is for Versa for native vWAN integration if you need that. If you don't need a vWAN integration, then you can just select a Versa operating system or VOS and select your software version. I recommend you always to use the latest one if your director support it. So your director should match the operating system here. So I select my image with 2214 and VM architecture x64. The size of the VM. To identify qualified Azure size, you can go to a docs.versa-networks.com and you can type here Azure Cloud Instance in order to see what Versa qualified types we have. So you can go to a qualified AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud instances and click on qualified Azure instance. We support F4, F8, F8 v2, and so on. So in my case, I'll select F8 v2 in this example. Authentication type will be SSH public key. I use all the settings by default. You can change optionally your username if you want, but by default it gives you Azure user as a username. And you want to generate a new key pair. Disks, all the settings I leave also by default, so we recommend to use SSD and 80 gig is enough. Under the networking, in this workflow, I'll use to create it for ETH0 only, and then we need to add more network interfaces for WAN and LAN accordingly. I also want to have a public IP associated with this, so I can do a ZTP with URL-based ZTP, so I can access this with a public URL. So I assign it a VOS Maxim demo IP. It will be static and routing preference will be internet. And I click OK. Under management and monitoring and advanced, I leave it all settings by default. I also recommend you to use tags so you can easily identify it. So I use name Maxim and value will be VOS demo. Create. And after validation is passed, I click on create. So this was a first step to create my VM. I will also download a private key. So I have my private key here and I return to create. So now deployment is started and it will deploy my VM. Once deployment is complete, you can click on go to resource. Go to a resource, where the next step will be to add more networks, WAN and LAN accordingly. In order to add more network interfaces to the VM, first of all I need to stop the VM. So I click stop and yes. Okay, once it is stopped, next thing I need to create my subnets for WAN and LAN. So I go to virtual networks and I look for my virtual network. And I click on subnets and click on new subnet. Subnet purpose will be default and name, I give it a WAN 10.2.1.0, it is fine for me. You can associate it with a network security group if you wish. and I click on Add. Similarly, I'm going to create a LAN 10.2.2.0/24, which is fine. Click Add. And now I have two more subnets, WAN and LAN. So now I go back to my virtual machine and go to network settings. And I need to attach a new network interface. So I click create and attach a new network interface in my resource group. Network interface name will be WAN and subnet I select as a WAN and I clicked on create. Similarly, I create a new interface for the LAN. Network interface name will be LAN and subnet is a LAN and create. Okay, so now I have my management port, my WAN and LAN. And for the LAN, I would like to also use a public IP address. So I click on configure. I will need to enable IP forwarding and apply. And then IP config and associate public IP address. I will look for my public IP addresses that I have, and I have here one of them. And click Save. Okay, then the next thing is to start my VM. So I go back to my virtual machine and I click on Start. Okay, once it is started, and I want to use now a URL-based ZTP to onboard my VM. In order to do that, I need to allow password-based authentication. It can be a temporary action or can be a permanent if you wish. So to enable a password-based authentication to this VM, I go to a serial console and I log into my VM. And I need to modify the file sshd config. And here I look for a password authentication. Password authentication I set to yes. Permit empty passwords no. And I save a file. Once it is done, I need to restart my service. Okay, so it is active now. So now I'm going to my network settings, and I verify my public IP address of ETH0. So here is my public IP address. I will copy it and I will verify if I can SSH to the VM. So I paste my IP address and I click open and I give it a username and password and I'm in. Next, in order to use a URL-based ZTP, you need to load the default configuration because VM is coming with an empty configuration. As you can see, there is no interfaces configured and WAN port is down. So with that config, device cannot get ZTP with URL-based ZTP, right? But you can still do a script. So if you want to do a URL-based ZTP, you go to a configuration mode and use a command load merge from opt versa etc boot p and default device config, and you commit a change. So that will be a factory default configuration loaded on the appliance. And now, if I check interfaces, WAN port will get IP address via DHCP from my Azure, which is 10.2.1.4. So device is ready for ZTP. I will use ETH0 management connection because then if you want to use a LAN, which is a standard, it has a static IP which is 192.168.1.1. So I need to modify this interface to have a DHCP received from Azure and assign a public IP address to the LAN port. So instead, I can use ETH0 IP, which already I have a public IP address for that. So I go back to my Azure portal. And next thing what I need to do in my firewall rule on my VOS, I create a new inbound rule which you can remove afterwards. And I will do it for port 443, which is used for URL-based ZTP. So I allow this rule and add it. Once rule is created, I can go ahead and do a ZTP. For that, I go to my Concerto portal and click on my VMs that I created here, and I click Get URL ZTP. I will copy it and paste into my browser. And one thing I need to do is I need to change this IP address from the default to my public IP address that is assigned by Azure. So I'm replacing it here. I copy my public IP and paste it here. I click on activation and start activation. So now my FlexVNAV will go through the standard ZTP URL based ZTP process. Okay, so activation completed successfully and device will reboot in a few seconds. So once appliance is rebooted, we can go back to our Concerto portal and we can see that activation is successful. We can go to a view, select appliance, and we select our appliance under SD-WAN overview, and device is reachable. One more caveat: when you deploy appliance with a Concerto, make sure in the configuration, when you go to your device or master template, under the configuration WAN interface, you should disable monitor, because by default Concerto will have this option enabled, so it will try to ping a default gateway to verify reachability. Azure default gateway will not respond to ICMP ping, so if monitor will go down, appliance will not be able to connect to the controllers. So this is only the caveat with the Concerto. I hope it was informative for you. Thank you for watching.